the locks for the Panama Canal, the propeller for Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis, rails for the Trans-Siberia Railroad. All were forged of Pittsburgh steel.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Point, your one-stop shop for all things sports, straight out of IUP and brought to you by The Pen. It is Brett and I here once again this week, and we got an action-packed, jam-packed filled episode here for all you guys, as we are going to dive right into Jake Paul and Ben Askren, the fight that took place over the weekend. Was it rigged? Is Jake Paul a joke, a menace for boxing in the society? And what's the future look like as he is looking to challenge Tommy Fury? And there's a lot of talk about him. Then we're going to hop into the NBA, and we got a lot of good topics here this week as we are going to talk and pull apart the play-in, how the NBA has decided to do a play-in tournament for the 7th through 10th seeds. Steph Curry is just going off the trail recently, and he's keeping the Warriors alive and keeping them relevant. So we're going to talk about him. Jimmy Butler calling the Heat soft, really unhappy with their play. And then we're also going to hop into the Defensive Player of the Year and how there's some speculations about what Joel Embiid thinks should happen. But the stats don't lie, and we have some stats we're going to run into there, and Joel Embiid might not be your favorite. So pulling this all together, we're coming right back. Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. Brett, everyone is kind of give or take here about what happens with Jake Paul and Logan Paul, the two brothers, as they hop into or I guess they're not really hop into, they're pretty established a little bit right now of fighting, but they both want to be professional. But there's always some sort of lore that happens around these fights. It's never just like, oh, they won, woohoo. It's like, well, was it real? Was it a legitimate fight? Was it worth it? Are they, there's a million questions. So of course, Jake Paul gets the win by knockout that he did over Ben Askren. And
round one.
Yeah, it was quick. People were saying from the start, why did I pay for this? Some people were saying that they watched it illegally and they want their money back, even though they didn't pay.
Yeah.
So I want to jump right into the first question is, some people were thinking this fight was blatantly, clearly rigged, that it was Ben Askren just out there to get a little bit of a paycheck since he's a retired UFC fighter. And Jake Paul, in return, gets to bolster up his ego, per se, and his professional status that he's trying to get. You think this was a rigged fight?
I don't think it was rigged in the sense like Ben Askren was like getting money to just fall down.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing whenever I saw him get knocked out, he got up right away. He seemed like he was ready to go. Now, I'm not a ref or anything, but
he was a bit of a shaky back and forth.
He was answering questions though. He was answering questions. I think he said, yeah, I'm good to go, all that stuff. But I would have kept letting him go.
I just think from a referee's perspective, if you let him go the next time, it's going to be a bad hit at that point. He would have probably been defenseless. And then that's a knockout that could be very damaging.
I felt like he would have been fine. I felt like he would have protected himself and all that stuff. But I don't think it was rigged. But with the ref and the quick call like that, I wouldn't put it past Jake Paul and the Paul brothers.
We've seen it go a lot further in boxing. We've seen guys get up there that are hanging on. They're hanging on, and they let them go out there and get hit again.
Too hard of a knockout. It was a great knockout. Jake Paul's becoming good at boxing. He's athletic. I won't call him a scrub. I wouldn't want to fight him.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the scrub status because Stephen A. Smith agrees with you, stating that he's not a scrub. He is a pro now. Would you say that Jake Paul is a pro boxer?
he has to fight a pro to be a pro. Like he's trying to fight Fury now.
Yeah, Tommy Fury. He fought Nate Robinson, as we have seen, and
Nate
just
Robinson
anyone that he
is a basketball player. He is not a boxer. He is not a boxer. That one does not count. All the YouTubers he fought does not count. I'll give him Ben Askren. I'll give him that one and go, hey, that was probably the most legitimate fight you had. But
well, he also faced off against Deji, and then he also did and then some Gibb.
All YouTubers. They don't count.
That's what I mean. He's in for and he had a technical knockout against Gibb, and he's finding these ways. He gets the knockout against Robinson. He's finding ways to make himself look relevant.
Those aren't fighters, though. That's the thing. Ben Askren was kind of a fighter, but he also holds the fastest, getting knocked out in the UFC. He has a record where he is the fastest person to get knocked out in a UFC fight. And now that's also something. Ben Askren's a good UFC fighter, but he's old. This was, like I said before, most legitimate fight he had, Jake Paul. But he still needs to fight.
And I want to follow that up real quick to kind of bring this all.
Why doesn't he challenge? I don't think he would do it. But Ryan Garcia, great fighter. Great fighter. I don't think Ryan Garcia would do it just because it's a joke. But hey, if I was Jake Paul, go after the best. Go after the best. We try and beat the best instead of all these scrubs.
The thing with Ryan Garcia is it would be interesting because, he is very prominent about his social media. He continues to prove himself. People don't take him seriously. I saw Dylan Dennis immediately come out and say, give me Jake Paul. I'll knock him out. He comments on anybody's posts at this point. But, you talk about his next challenge. And we look at Jake Paul likely to challenge Tommy Fury, and we look at Tommy Fury. Now, he's a young, trying to establish himself as a boxer, but everyone that he has beaten has little to no recognition. I mean, one of his opponents had a record of 10 and 112 as their boxing record. Now, he's established, he's getting himself in here. But it's just, he's not really, is Jake Paul really going to fight? When is he going to fight somebody that is really going to make people think, okay, he's the real deal?
Now, the thing is, 10 and 121, or what was it? 112?
10 and 112.
112. He has to have experience fighting at that point. If you fought that many times, might have lost that many times, but you have to have some sort of experience. Tully has more experience than Nate Robinson and those two YouTubers combined, all into three. That dude that lost so many times.
And then you look at Ben Askren, who was a UFC fighter. So I guess we're trending upwards.
He's more of a wrestler. He was in the Olympics for wrestling. Ben Askren. He is not a stand-up boxing type UFC fighter. He's gonna put you down on the ground and grapple you and submit you and win that way. He was never really a boxer.
And it's a shame that these guys don't get in the octagon to fight some of these out. Because we saw it with Conor McGregor and Mayweather. It's just they can compete there in the boxing ring, but it's not the same nearly. So Ben Askren, I think, would have.
Yeah, if Mayweather versus Conor McGregor in a UFC ring, Mayweather might die.
And what would you think the same would have happened with Jake Paul and Ben Askren?
Oh, I think it would too. Ben Askren would just put him down on the ground. Next thing you know, armbar. Oh, and Jake Paul is tapping, crying.
So, we don't really get to see that match. We haven't really gotten a match between two guys for
Jake Paul's the one person I could see it happening. If Ben Askren called him out and said, fight me in the UFC, I could see Jake Paul actually might be
he wants that reputation. That's all that matters.
I'll do it. He'd be like, you know what? Screw it. I'll do it. I that's the only person I could see really doing it. Just because Jake Paul and Logan Paul both have that wrestling background, actually. Especially Logan Paul. Jake Paul, not that much, but Logan Paul actually has a very good wrestling background. And that's you have stand-up, of course, but most people have a challenge with UFC is because of the ground game. The ground game is so important. Blocking, takedowns, bringing people down, it's a big part of it.
Well, as we see, as Logan Paul sets to hopefully fight off against Floyd Mayweather, maybe we'll get to see Jake Paul Well, that's the plan right now.
And everything, it keeps getting postponed. Like,
well, these Paul brothers, this is their destiny right now. They want to be professional. It's all up in the air. Here at the point, we're not calling them pro at all right now. We need to see them fight a pro fight. And we'll see what happens here in the future. But let us know your takes. Not a scrub, as Stephen A. and Brett say, but they really aren't reputable just yet. So we'll see what happens down the line.
He's an up-and-coming fighter. That's what I'll call him. He's an up-and-coming fighter right now.
That's a great way to put it. We'll see how these up-and-coming fighters do down the line, as maybe Tommy Fury will be in the ring with Jake Paul. And moving along here with this episode of The Point, we are hopping right into the NBA. Everything's coming down to the wire here. It's towards the end of the season, and we have learned and we have all found out that a play-in tournament is going to take place. And this will be used to determine the 7th and 8th seed in each conference. And how this is going to work is the 7th seed is going to host the 8th seed. The winner of that game, they are the 7th seed in the play. So one game, they will hold the 7th seed. The 9th seed will host the 10th seed. The winner of that game kind of is in an idle position. The loser of the 9 versus 10 is going to play the loser of the 7 versus 8. The winner of that game now plays the winner of the 9 versus 10, and the winner of that goes on as the 8th seed. It's just, this is so unnecessary. And we have seen that Luka Doncic and Mark Cuban for the Mavericks, they have said, Doncic said, I don't understand the idea of a play-in. You play 72 games to get into the playoffs, then maybe you lose 1-2 in a row and you're out of the playoffs. I don't see the point of that. Cuban backed him up and said, in hindsight, this approach was an enormous mistake. Brett, do you think this is necessary?
This is terrible. This is so bad. Like, if I was a player, I'd be so frustrated with this new rule. Like, you play, like you said, 72 games. You're in the regular season, and you win the games you need to do. You beat the teams that you need to beat.
Everyone knows it's 72 from the start, too. It's not the stop-start or anything.
Next thing you know, you have to play a tournament to get in the playoffs, but you already made it. You already made it in the playoffs. You already beat the team that's below you to get there. And next thing you know, the NBA is like, you know what, new rule. This is like halfway through the season, too. They should have implemented this next season if they really wanted to do this, because this is terrible. Like, I'm not even a player, and I'm getting frustrated over this. I'm just a fan, and I watch the game, and I wouldn't want to watch this play-in tournament. I think it's unfair. And the only advantage is that those that are in 7th and 8th place when it starts, they get to lose 2 games instead of the single elimination. Yeah, but still, they shouldn't have to play that game at all. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, they have the regular season for them don't really matter then. Like, I guess, like, you need to get to the 10th, 9th, 8th, or 7th seed now to might make the playoffs.
And it's interesting that you make that point, because when we look at who is going to be in this, we look at the East. You have the Heat and the Hornets that are in 7th and 8th. They're holding on to those positions, but I mean, that doesn't matter really. Then you have the Pacers in 9th, and then you have the Raptors, the Bulls, and the Wizards that are all basically tied for 10th place. So what happens if you have these tiebreakers down the line? Now you got to expand it. We look at the West. You have the Mavericks and the Grizzlies, that are holding the 7th and 8th place spots. Then you have the Warriors, the Spurs, and maybe the Pelicans.
And the only reason why I like this rule is the Pelicans. My favorite team, the Pelicans, they might make the playoffs because of it. But still, they shouldn't. They if they're the 11th seed right now. If they make it to the 10th and they get into the playoffs, I'm going to be ashamed to be a fan of the Pelicans. Because
imagine if they upset a number 1 seed. Imagine if they win it and they upset the Jazz.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. Just because I love the Pelicans. I love the players on the team.
That's just where you see asterisks start coming out as, they, playoff win. Because, like, if you have an 11th, 10th seed Pelicans team turns into your 8th seed and they somehow upset the Utah Jazz without Donovan Mitchell and they go into the second round, it's just like, this is just ridiculous. But of course they, come time for it to show up, they need to, the Jazz would have to show up more than the Pelicans.
Oh yeah, but like, this is like, if I was like I said before, if I was a player, this would frustrate the crap out of me. Like, this is terrible. Like, especially halfway through the season too, and they just implement this new rule. They're just like, oh yeah, everything will be fine. No one will be angry. I'd be angry. Hopefully, Mark Cuban, he's an owner. Hopefully, he voices his opinion. And he
did. He voiced his opinion, but
hopefully, he gets his rule overturned. And just they need to implement it next season. They can't just like implement this rule halfway through the season and just go, oh yeah, you guys might not make the playoffs, even though you did make the playoffs a week ago. Like, ridiculous. Like,
so, and he's voiced his concern, but this is what they're going to go down with. And as we talked about in the West, we have the Warriors that are hanging on to that 9th place spot right now. And I want to tie this into because we've talked about the MVP candidate a couple times, and you have Steph Curry, who is practically single-handedly keeping the Warriors relevant, keeping them alive for this play-in now. In this past week, he hit 36 3-pointers. That was more than the Magic, the Kings, the Wizards, and the Pelicans. All of these teams didn't even hit as many threes as Curry did. So when we step back here, we have seen that MVP is usually for a winning, successful team. But Brett, this should open the door, right? You shouldn't. Curry is the most valuable player to his team right now. He is the reason they are alive. Do you think that like it should be given to a player that's on a more successful team with help?
See, if I was a voter, I'd vote for the best player in the league, the most valuable player. But at this point, if you're not on the winning team, if you're not on the top team, you're not going to win MVP. These voters are very biased, and they rarely pick the right MVP that actually deserves it. So many people get gypped every single year, and he might get so many points per game and be the front runner for MVP, just doesn't win because his team sucks. Like, that's not his fault. He's doing the best he can. He's the most valuable player on his team. But just because his team's bad, he's not going to win the MVP.
And especially if we looked at this team with Klay Thompson on it, if you just gave him that little bit of help, it'd probably be a 7th, 6th, 7th, 8th place team instead of on the 9th place on the outside. So it is a shame. I do agree with you there, Brett. And I think a lot of people would agree with that they hand it to who is successful and who is
I don't even think you need to make the playoffs to win MVP. You could be a 12th seed, and a player could be making 30 points per game, so many rebounds, so many assists, and be the most valuable player for that team. I think they still should win MVP if they're the most valuable player. Like, even though their team sucks, if they're the most valuable player, they should win it.
I think that's a very fair argument. It's a shame that it is not there. Moving forward here, we're going to touch base on what Jimmy Butler said about the Miami Heat, and they're in the mix right now. They're fighting for that 7th, 8th spot. So Jimmy Butler called out all of the Miami Heat, saying they are soft. They're not physical. They are not really giving their all. They're not putting that effort out there. He said they do it so often, and it's almost like it's expected of them. And we saw last year when they were making their finals run, that was a big motto for them. We saw Tyler here talk about, especially Jimmy Butler, saying that, we call each other out. If you're making mistakes, you're called out. It's not, anything personal. When you make a mistake, we call each other out. And they've just been incredibly inconsistent this year as a team. They look like they can be that contender, then they're not, and it flips. But then they go on, and it's Bam Adebayo who hits a last-second 2 for them to beat the Nets. Of all teams, to beat the Nets. And move forward here.
The Nets aren't that good right now. They only have Kyrie playing. They have Harden and KD injured. Like, it's a Kyrie show right now. It's just Kyrie. And if Kyrie doesn't hit his shots, they're not going to win.
What about Blake Griffin? What about Blake the big signing?
He's a good role player right now. And then, of course, LaMarcus Aldridge retired because of his irregular heartbeat. Hey, all for it. Hope him the best. I'm actually I was very, very, very disappointed he actually joined the Nets. Wish he would have joined a different team. I think he would have been a lot more playing time on a different team, contributing a lot more to a different team than the Nets. I feel like he just did that to win a ring. But hey, he retired now, so it doesn't matter.
Well, let me ask you this.
The Nets have gotten worse because Aldridge has left.
Well, let me ask you this, because they formed the super team. They want to get that ring. They want to go for it. But we do see it. We see them tremendously struggle with KD and Harden sitting out, and who knows what KD's going to be on the. I think he activated or altered his right Achilles in a way that is going to keep him sidelined even longer now. So, I want to ask you this. Do you think that these super teams just don't have chemistry? Do you think that they really don't gel together? Because they don't really seem to be, there's not a lot of camaraderie.
Super teams, it matters to the players. Like KD, Harden, Kyrie. Honestly, Harden, I always thought he was a problem on teams and all that stuff, but he's honestly the best player on the team. He passes all the time. He's a pass-first player. If you watch him play whenever the Nets were actually without KD and it was just Harden and Kyrie, he was playing fantastic.
It's interesting, though. It is interesting to pull that apart and see how the Nets are kind of trending downward and we're seeing other teams trend upward. So to move into our final topic here of everything, we want to touch on, because Joel Embiid comes out and says that, he says, I want Defensive Player of the Year. I deserve Defensive Player of the Year. 76ers overall, they have the second best defense in the league, but we're not talking about team defense here. We're talking about one single player. And, he acknowledged that Ben Simmons, who's also on the 76ers, is up there with him, but he should be the winner. Joel Embiid should. But I want to just pull apart some stats here with you, Brett, because when we look at some players that are in contention here for Defensive Player of the Year, Joel Embiid doesn't really strike me as much. So we'll start with Embiid here. He's averaging 8.9 defensive rebounds a game, 3.1 turnovers, just 1 steal, and only 1.4 blocks a game. You look at his teammate, Ben Simmons, only 6 rebounds, 3.3 turnovers, 1.6 steals, and 0.6 blocks. So last block, obviously we're not really, Ben Simmons isn't in the conversation here as much. But then you look at somebody like Rudy Gobert on the Jazz, who has 10.1 defensive rebounds a game, less turnovers at 1.6. He has half a steal, so, half a steal less, but he's got 2.9 blocks a game. So close to doubling the blocks of Embiid. Then you can look even guys, like Giannis, who has 9.5 rebounds a game, but only 1.3 blocks. And even Miles Turner, but he's only got 5.2 defensive rebounds a game, 3.4 blocks. But you look at Embiid, and I don't know if he's stat watching, but he has less rebounds than Gobert. He has double the steals, or I'm sorry, double the turnovers. He has, Gobert has 10.1 rebounds, 1.6 steals compared to the 1.6 turnovers compared to the 3.1 turnovers for Embiid. And then he only has half a steal better, it does Embiid. So I don't know. You look at Gobert, you look at Embiid. Does Embiid really think he deserves, Defensive Player of the Year when Gobert has more rebounds, less turnovers, almost the same steals, but he's way more blocks?
For me, with Defensive Player of the Year, you can't really measure how well a player is defensively, without doing the stats. Gobert, 2.9 blocks per game.
Yeah.
That's 6 points right there. 6 points because the blocks are in the paint. That's 6 points per game that he is stopping. That's substantial in the NBA. Some games go down to the wire, just like the Nets.
That's double of Joel Embiid, who has
that's double. That's what I look at whenever I look at Defensive Player of the Year. I look at steals, I look at blocks. And if you got more than that as the other player, and you also got rebounds, if you got more than that, you're doing good.
And you look at Gobert.
I'm not really a Gobert fan that much.
Yeah, and a lot of people.
But you know what? He's doing great defensively. That's who if I was a voter, that's who I'd vote for.
Especially when you see, a guy with more rebounds, way less turnovers, double the blocks, and only half of a steal less per game. Rudy Gobert, I think he's a 2-time winner. So I don't know, Joel Embiid is, he might not be looking at these things. He probably feels, the 76ers have the second best defense in the league. So he probably feels like, man, we are really good defensively. I'm really contributing this defense. But you also have Ben Simmons that's helping you as a backup there. It's making that defense look so good. So I don't know about that with Embiid. I don't know if
he needs more blocks. Joel Embiid
definitely
needs more blocks.
And the fact that Gobert is doubling him in the blocks and he has more rebounds and less turnovers. he has half of the turnovers compared to Embiid. So I don't know. I think Gobert is kind of on his own here. And Joel Embiid, maybe if he didn't miss so many games, unfortunately, with the injury, it might be difference, but there might be a difference there. But I do think it's Rudy Gobert. And I think you might not like Rudy Gobert as a player, but he's owning the paint right now on defense. So we'll see how it plays out. Like we have said with MVP that Brett pointed out, it's really that these people will vote for who's their favorite.
They're just going to vote for the best team. Like if you're not on a good team, like top 5, you're not going to win any awards.
Well, luckily for Gobert, he's on the Jazz
right now. Like, yeah, Jazz top 2, like they're top 3. They're gonna be able to be voted for.
So let's hope he gets it. Let's hope he proves it wrong, because I think Joel Embiid is in the wrong here. So we'll see how it pans out with MVP and with Defensive Player of the Year. Everybody, well, that is everything we have for you today on The Point. We talked about Jake Paul. We tied it into Logan Paul of the Paul brothers, what the heck that means for the fighting community. And then, of course, the NBA play-in. What do you guys think about that? I think we're pretty negative about it. I think a lot of the players are negative, except the ones that are going to be able to use this as the chance to potentially get in the playoffs. And of course, we have our MVP race. We have our Defensive Player of the Year. Let us know what you guys think about with that, especially for Rudy Gobert. We've voiced some pretty strong opinions for Rudy Gobert for Defensive Player of the Year over Embiid. So that's everything we have for you guys here today on The Point. Make sure you come back next Tuesday for another episode. That is all we have for you today. Thanks for tuning in.